What if the most powerful thing about your school isn't a program, a test score, or a graduation rate, but simply the fact that your doors are open to every child, every single day, no matter who they are or where they come from? Reflect on that for a moment. Because if you are a principal, a school administrator, a superintendent, a central office administrator, or a district leader, you have likely spent the last several years answering questions about choice, competition, and innovation. You have sat in board meetings, community forums, and professional conferences where the conversation quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, implies that traditional public schools are a fallback option, a default rather than a destination. But what if we have had this backward all along? Years ago, I walked into a school during an enrollment rush. I remember the assistant principal standing at the front door at 7:15 a.m. greeting students who were just arriving, including a family that had driven across town in a borrowed car, speaking halting English, carrying documents in a manila folder they had clearly gathered in a hurry. They had enrolled that morning, and by 8 a.m., the children were in class. No application fee, no waiting list, no test, no interview, no rejection letter. Just, you are here, come on in. That moment has stayed with me because it captures something educators often forget to say out loud. Something so fundamental that we have begun to treat it as ordinary. Traditional public schools are the only educational institution in this country constitutionally and morally bound to open their doors to every child, regardless of background, income, ability, language, zip code, or circumstance. That is not a small thing. That is everything. And yet, here is where many of us go wrong. We stop talking about it. We become so consumed with defending our schools against criticism, competing with messaging from other educational models, and chasing metrics that measure the outcomes of education that we forget to make the case for the foundation of education, the open door itself. So let me be direct about what I observe across school systems. Well-meaning leaders often lead with data, and I myself am guilty of this. We highlight test scores, graduation rates, AP enrollment numbers, and college acceptance percentages. And those numbers matter deeply. But when we lead exclusively with data, we inadvertently play a game we were never designed to win. Charter schools can curate their enrollment. Private schools can select their students. Traditional public schools cannot and should not. And that distinction is not a weakness. It is a defining moral strength. The leadership posture that needs to shift is this. We must stop treating open access as a liability to be explained away and start honoring it as the cornerstone of everything we do. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his letter from the Birmingham jail about the urgent need to make the promises of democracy real. The promise of public education, that every child will be welcomed, educated, and valued, is one of the most direct expressions of the democratic ideal, still alive in American civic life. As John Dewey argued more than a century ago, public education is the foundation upon which a democratic society is built. Now, these are not abstract ideas. They live in the work you do every morning when the first bus pulls up. Consider the words of Frederick Douglass. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Public schools are where the building happens for all children, not just those whose families can afford an alternative. Now, here is the mindset recalibration that I believe every public school leader needs to make. When you wake up tomorrow morning and walk into your building, I want you to see the open door differently. I want you to see the child who arrived mid-semester because her family relocated due to job loss. Your school took her in. How about the student with a learning disability whose parents were nervous about placement options? Your school served him. I want you to see the English language learner who arrived in October with no prior formal education. Your school found a way. No other educational institution in this country is required to do that. Only yours. That is not a burden. That is a badge of honor. The practical work of honoring open access, and this is where many administrators lose the thread, is not simply about enrollment policy. It is about culture. A school can technically open its doors to every child while still creating invisible barriers. Let me give you a few examples. An unwelcoming front office. How about inconsistent communication in multiple languages? Or a scheduling process that disadvantages late enrollees? Or maybe a discipline system that pushes students out faster than the community sends them in. You see, research consistently demonstrates that inclusive school environments, those that genuinely embrace the full range of students who walk through their doors, produce stronger outcomes for all students, not just those who have historically been underserved. Equity and excellence are not opposing forces. They are, in the best public schools, inseparable. So the right answer, the one that honors both the promise and the practice of open access, requires leaders to do two things simultaneously. First is to champion the moral and constitutional commitment loudly and unapologetically in their communities, and conduct an honest internal audit of whether every system, every process, and every staff interaction is truly aligned with that commitment. Ask yourself, do our enrollment process feel welcoming to families who are afraid or unfamiliar with the process? Does our front office communicate warmth before it communicates paperwork? Do we have clear systems for students who arrive at unexpected times in the school year? How about, do we celebrate the diversity of our student population as a strength rather than manage it as a complication? The answer to those questions reveal the gap between the open door promise and the open door reality. Closing that gap is the work of leadership. So, here's what I'm asking you to do this week. Find a moment in a faculty meeting, a community presentation, a parent newsletter, or a conversation with a new family to say, clearly and with conviction, our doors are open to every child. That is not our limitation. It is our legacy. Then, back it up. Review one process in your school or district, just one, that might be creating an invisible barrier between a family and the education their children deserve. It might be your enrollment paperwork. It might be the language on your website. It might be the way your front office handles a family arriving in February, mid-year, with a child who has never been in an American classroom before. Change that one thing, and then find the next one, because the open door promise is only as powerful as the culture it opens into. You have the honor and the responsibility of making sure that what a child finds on the other side of that door matches what the door itself declares. Public schools are, as education scholar Linda Darling Hammond has written, the cornerstone of democratic society. They are not a fallback. They are not a default. They are the most inclusive, the most equitable, and in many ways, the most courageous educational institutions this country has ever built. Remember, every child, every day, every door open. That is worth leading for. So, what is one barrier, visible or invisible, that might be standing between a family in your community and the full promise of your school's open door?